Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries. I'm your host, John, and today we're going to be continuing our conversation with Matthew and Johannes, and we're going to be talking about authorial intent and one of the potential benefits of system mastery of a game. And we'll get to that straight after the music. When I'm a player in a game, like you can sort of pick up on like when a GM feels like invested in a system. So it's like I've played in a few 3.0 D&D games that Rob's run, and if I'm running D&D, like to be honest, third edition is not my edition of preference. Obviously, I'm not going to get into like edition wars. Play what you want. That's all.
It's a choice as much as anything else. Edition wars are stupid. Yeah, the waste of time.
Whatever edition you're playing, if you're enjoying it, fine, crack on. Like I say, third edition, not my favourite one. But when Rob's like, I'm going to run a game, and you see him getting like enthused about it because he loves the system and it's what he feels comfortable with, that enthusiasm like rubs off on the players. So like when you were talking about us running Burning Wheel, I'm like, all right, I can tell like Johannes is really like invested in this game. He really like loves the game. You can tell he's comfortable with running it. So you're like, right, we're going to have a good time in this game because like the GM's going to be having a good time. Whereas if you get someone and they're like, oh, I'm not really sure about this rule system. We'll give it a try. We'll see how we get on. It doesn't have the same feeling, if you know what I mean, as a player. If like the GM doesn't seem sure about the game, it's more difficult for you as a player, I think. Well, for me personally, to like buy into it. Whereas if the GM's like, right, I've got this great system. Right, let's get together. Let's sort out what we're going to run for a game. Yeah, I love this game. It's great. Then that energy sort of tends to like feed into like the players, and you start getting like hyped up for yourself. So like when you Johannes were like, all right, we're going to run another Stars Without a Number game, but this time we're going to go to like Codex of the Black Sun because you guys seem to like the idea of magic. We're going to get involved in that. There's going to be like spells, and there's going to be this, and we're going to go into a new area of space. By the time you finished talking about it, I was like, great, let's get into that space and like cast some spells.
Yeah, full speed ahead.
Yeah. Whereas I think if you'd, don't get me wrong, I'm sure we'd still had a good game, but if you'd have come to it and you were like, yeah, I love Stars Without a Number, not really sure about this like magic book though, but we'll give it a try, see how it goes. I don't think I'm sure I'd have still enjoyed the game, but I wouldn't have been like as hyped up like before the game started. Whereas by the time we got to like the first actual session of it, I was like, oh my god, I'm playing like an off-brand Jedi, and Matthew's playing like a demon hunter, and we're like Battlestar Galactica in this like shit all over the place. Let's go.
Let's go.
I think that's a good sort of, as we're talking about the games that we run, obviously there's many ingredients that go into like why you would run something and why people would enjoy it. But I do think, like as John has just established, and I'm just riffing on it with different words, it is a massive multiplier if the person running the game, sort of organizing the game in these traditional frameworks where a person is responsible for most of the world content, playing at the world, as it were. If they are enthused, it will just carry a very long distance with the enjoyment of other people in there as well. Because it's just, not that I don't think I've ever seen this or heard about this, but I don't think it would be very, I don't know, sort of inspiring if you went to, okay, we're setting up a new game, and the person who's been selected for running the game they're like, oh, well, I guess if you guys want to do OSR stuff, I guess I could pull it out.
If that's what you want.
This is like what was should we play board games instead, my dude? Like what's going on? Whereas my experience is very much like what we've been talking about here, where someone's like, guys, I got this book, right? And then it's just like full on,
try it.
Dragon Force guitar solo from then on.
Yeah, and I mean, I've heard you, Matthew, talk about like your love of Delta Green.
I absolutely love it.
And it's like, I've never played Delta Green, but like if you were to turn around tomorrow and be like, right, guys, I've got some free time. I'm thinking about running.
I got ideas, John.
You're like, I'm thinking about running a Delta Green game. Are you in? I'll be like, yes. I've heard Matthew talk about this. It sounds cool as shit. Let's like get on it and do it. Whereas if you were just like, oh, I've picked up this game from a convention. It's all right. We could give it a go if you want. I'd probably still give it a go because obviously I've gamed with you guys before, but I wouldn't have that initial sort of like build up and that excitement. And I mean, I know for me to go back to talking about switching rules for my recent game, I had to like think quite long and hard about that because effectively I was like feeling a bit guilty and being like, oh, I've sort of like I've sold the players on like we're going to be playing this game, and like 3 sessions in, I'm like, guys, I'm kind of like struggling with this rule set. I'd like to shift to something a bit more straightforward that I can run a bit easier. And I had no doubt that my players were going to be like, because I know the people we're playing with, I had no doubt they were going to be like, yeah, we'll give it a shot. That's great. But at the same token, which eventually persuaded me, I had to also think, right, if I'm not enjoying this rule system, and it's fairly obvious when I'm not enjoying something. I was like, if I just carry on trying to run the game with a system I'm not enjoying, it's going to be pretty obvious that is the case to the players. And if you're, because like say, as we've said, running a game, preparing for a game is effort, it's work. You have to you put in however many hours or whatever you put into creating the game, and if you're not really loving it and you're not enjoying it, it becomes that much harder to put that effort in and to make that time to do the prep, to like get your maps ready and your tokens and whatever else you need to get ready and prep your game sessions. So for me, I was like, right, do I want to carry on running the game and again see these like diminishing returns where like my interest is slowly tapering off until eventually, worst case scenario, the game sort of fizzles out and we start running something else, or the players start getting bored with it and then they're like, oh, can we try something a bit different? Or do I just go, right, make a clean break, we'll switch to a different game system, we'll see how that goes, see if that can like get the enthusiasm back and we can get a better game as a result. And obviously that's what I went with.
Yeah. And I think for me personally, I would have wanted to play Worlds Without Number, sure. Never even really heard of Easy D6. I knew that it existed, but not so much about what it was. So cool to try that out. The underlying thing to all things RPG, though, in my opinion, is like you're doing this to have fun. Like if everything else is absolutely going to the chopping block. Like it's a waste of time. Again, I think it's very necessary, at least for me, to be very sort of, I suppose, cutthroat about it in the way that, or cutthroat is maybe a little bit too negatively charged, but sort of like ruthless and strict about the fact that if someone's not having fun, we need to change up because that's the only reason we're here to begin with. So
have a good time with each other.
Anything else, it has to go.
And I do think as well, like when I was saying earlier, talking about being more willing to take risks with a new game potentially, I think even though we've not carried on running with Worlds Without Number, I've learnt a valuable lesson from trying that. So don't get me wrong, I am going to circle around to like running Worlds Without Number again, but I'll be like, right, okay, let's start off with like the basic classes, start off at the base level, and I'll get a couple of games with that under my belt. And if that all goes great and I'm all fine with it, then maybe again at some point in the future I'll be like, right, now I'm going to feel comfortable like trying all these heroic classes and stuff like that. So again, as I said earlier, it's like a case of trying to run before I could walk. Whereas, like I say, no shade on the game system, and I am going to circle around to try and get again at some point in the future. But I got a bit carried away with like the excitement of like, oh, we could try all this new like whiz bang like cool extra stuff that you can bolt onto it, without going like, oh, I've got like a solid grounding in the basic system first.
It's a learning experience for you.
Yeah, and it is like it's fine, right? Like people try stuff all the time, and they figure out, okay, not ideal or not right now, and then we do something else. And you just gotta be humble about it. I think overall, it's just like anything in life, really.
Yeah.
Just talk about it openly.
Yeah.
I was going to mention, like, just before we move on to another point, like, it's a very different scenario when you're learning a system called without any like outside help. You're just
Yeah.
learning a game to run it. You've not played in a game, you've not seen it played, you're just learning it yourself and trying to run a game. That's very different than having some experience playing another person's game and then sort of absorbing it piece by piece. It's a lot more difficult to do it in isolation, I think, but it can be done.
Yeah, and I mean, without sort of continuing harping on about it with the whole like words without number scenario, I mistakenly, as it turns out, went into it going like, right, I've played in a load of Johannes' Stars Light number games. They use basically the same system. One's the sci-fi version, one's the fantasy version. So I was like, right, I know how the basic core system works. I know how the skill system works.
Yeah.
I'm good, I think. But then when you think, all right, okay, so it's basically the D&D chassis, which I know fairly well. But then you're like, all right, okay, it's got a skill system, not a difficult one, not a ridiculous one. It's got like a nice simple skill system bolted onto it. There's a few other bits and pieces that are sort of added onto it. And then when you think, oh, that'd be fine on its own, then you think, right, we've got the heroic classes, which is another bit bolted onto it. And then there's all sort of extra bits and pieces that come off that. And it was all just like a little bit too much to be taken on, like for my first game using that system.
I've got another just before you move on.
Okay,
And one more to circle back to something because I wrote a little note to make sure I mentioned it. Is when you were talking about like, trying to when the players come to you, you want to be able to answer their questions. And that's kind of a thing. It sounds pretentious to say, especially coming from me there. But like when you're in the GM's chair, you feel like an ambassador to the hobby, but also to the game. You really want to sell the game that you like to the players and be like, "This is what's cool about it, and I want to show you. I want to have fun together."
Yeah.
So you have that pressure. I really need to understand everything. So when the players bring something into the game that you're not comfortable with, that can cause a few issues. Like you said, the classes. Because I have an example of this as well. Because in my first few campaigns, I went, right, no multi-classing. No multi-classing, just play the character, just straight classes in the DD games. And one of the players eventually came to me and be like, why, it's in the books, why won't you let me multi-class? Like, what's the issue? Like, you let us use the feat, you let us use the magic, you give us, what is it about this? And I was trying to explain to them, I was like, look, if I switch that on, I can't just switch it on for one person. Everyone has to then be able to do it. And then two, I have to understand it better than anybody at the table because they're going to ask me the questions. And it's going to change how the game is structured because it completely changes the mechanics once somebody does it. It doesn't seem like a big change, but it is. And if you don't understand what you're doing with those mechanics, you'll find yourself either being vastly overpowered compared to everybody else if you know what you're doing, or just this kind of completely unwieldy mixture because the designers of the game have presented the classes in this kind of structure for you to follow.
Yeah.
And if you go outside of that, then the game's going to change for you. And like you're choosing to do that, but I'm trying to help you by saying, okay, once we all understand it, then I'm going to let everyone do it. That's kind of like one of the things I went back to when they asked me about it.
I think as well, without meaning to sound like too negative, you have to sort of bear in mind like your own strengths and like weaknesses when it comes to like picking up a new system. So just as a random example, I've got like the 3 core books and a few other books for like Pathfinder First Edition because I like the artwork in them. There's some cool ideas in them, but I have never even tried to run that game because for me there's so much stuff involved in it that I'm like, there is no way I would personally be able to like absorb all that stuff to the point where I would feel comfortable running it as a games master. So I've taken little bits and pieces from it, little bits of inspiration, and it's why I like all the sort of D&D games because by and large you can take bits out of like one edition or whatever, and you can drop a bit of tweaking, you can drop it into another game. That's great. So I can take my old sort of D&D that I'm comfortable with, and I can drop other bits and pieces from many other various games into it without too much trouble. But I've not got to go to the effort of being like, right, okay, I've got to read and digest and absorb and remember everything in those like massive Pathfinder core books. And again, that's no shade on the game. I'm sure there's people out there there's people out there who run it and enjoy it. People who've absorbed it, they've got it on lock, they know all of that, they're comfortable running it. But for me, I know I would struggle to absorb the amount of material in those books.
Absolutely. And as I said before, like I want to show them the cool thing about the game. So if they come to
Yeah.
me with a question, I want to have an answer for them. Be like, "Oh, why would I play this?" Well, this is why, and this is what makes it great in the game, and this is why it's there. This is what you can do with it. I don't want to be like, "Well, let's read." I want to be able to tell them and like give them examples. Yeah, but I actually have. When you're ready, I have a question for you too as well.
Oh, go for it.
I wanted to ask. Yeah, this is the kind of thing that as you were talking, it came to me. I was like, when you're approaching a new campaign, do you have a method of putting that campaign together that you've come up with after your years of experience, like little tips you've got from different books and different games you've sort of formulated a way that you like to run? Or do you run the game as the book is trying to get you to run it? Like, do you look at the GM section of the book and be like, okay, I'm going to try and tailor my style to what the book is trying to go for? Because for me, just before you guys answer, is when I ran my three D&D games, I ran them very differently to each other.
Okay.
Like the first game was kind of like I don't know if you guys know the video game, a Dark Souls game, so it's kind of like it's very centralized on the perspective of the players. Like it's all about them and how they connect to that world. The second game is a kind of like a spy drama, espionage. Like it's like I ran it like a drama, like them uncovering these mysteries and like getting recontextualizations of things they thought they understood.
Okay.
And then the kind of other game I ran, like episodic game, which is this one, the game's on hiatus, but this was like I'm running like kind of almost like TV show kind of episodes where they don't exactly connect together, but they can. That makes sense. So there was no deliberate link to them, but you could they were set in the same area, so you could sort of draw like a connection between them if you wanted to.
I mean, I think
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I think to answer your question from sort of my perspective, I have preferences for certain types of games. So as I was saying earlier, I like the sort of hex exploration, like open world, the stuff out there. Players go out and find the stuff and like do the cool thing. That's my preference. But I think when I look at a rule system, if it's got like a certain theme or a certain thing that game does well, then I do try and lean into it a little bit more. So like when we run like tremulous one shots and stuff like that, that like they all tend to lead to sort of like a climactic encounter with something from the mythos, and you either like triumph or escape with your lives, or you end up going mad and stuff like that happens. And you lean into that because the game is very much based around that. If I ever get around to running Vesson, that's very much based around the idea you're trying to restart this ancient like monster hunting society, and you're going out to try and like stop these like creatures of myth and legend from like interfering with the real world. So I would lean into that. But I think within the themes of games you get a lot of wiggle room. So like for Vesson, you could just run it very episodic, like here is today's mission, you're going out to get X creature. Next session, here is this mission, we're going out to get that creature. But you could also say that for D&D. You could be like, right, you all work for an adventurers guild, to use like an obvious example. Right, here is the mission you've been given, here's the quest, here's this, that, and the other. But with Vesson, you could also be like, right, okay, here's your base, here's the area you're in. Oh, it's being menaced by supernatural creatures. Go do what you do best and let the players lead it. And I prefer my games to be like that, where you sort of set up the setting and the sort of area, and it might only just be like a little small area, like in the game I'm running at the minute. We've got like a tiny hex map with like a little town, like frontier town, linked by a railroad to like the rest of civilization, which is off the map to the west, and then to the east we've got like weird sort of like haunted forests and like a couple of mountain ranges and stuff like that. And we came up with a bit of background, and then it's like, right, players, here is the area, go explore, do what you do. And then we'll sort of play off with that, and as they discover things, plot will come up based on them.
A widening of the scope.
From there. Yeah, exactly. And if we need to like expand the map, like they go off the eastern range of it, that's absolutely fine. So I think in a roundabout way, like I say, I do have my preferences, and those preferences will be present in some sort of way, like I said, like the open world and the exploration part of it and stuff like that. But I will try and sort of lean that towards whatever the theme of the game I'm running is. So Dungeons and Dragons, like an easy D6, which is like a sort of simplified version of Dungeons and Dragons, It's very much exploring, fighting monsters, exploring dungeons, finding treasure, and it's very simplest. And there will be some of that in the game because I'm running that sort of game, but there'll also be other stuff in it. So like we've got, they're exploring like a sort of crazy, sort of like haunted, sort of weird like fey forest to the east at the minute. But part of the reason they're exploring, and that's standard sort of D&D-ish style of sort of exploration, but the reason they're exploring that is because my friend Dave's character is like, all right, if we're settling in this frontier town, we need to have a means to support ourselves. And he's like, oh, we found out that like if you can hold a bit of land, because it's all sort of Wild West rules, if you hold a bit of land and you can police it, you can like make a legitimate claim to that land. And he's like, oh well, maybe we could start up like a vineyard and we could like make money to eventually funnel back into like reviving the war against the Church of Progress by like setting up this vineyard and setting up this business, and we sort of make our way like that. And that's all stuff that's come up because of the players, and we'll lean into that and we'll see how that goes. But that's like an extra layer on top of the default assumptions that EZD6 and D&D has. Don't know how you feel about Matthew's question, Johannes.
Matthew, do you want to give me the straight dope again?
Yeah, so basically what I was saying originally was like the idea of when you approach a game, like now that you've had experience of running and playing in other games, do you have like a set way that you approach it? Like this is my style, this is what I'm going to do. I have my tools, I have my my way of doing things, or do I look at the book and go, okay, the book wants me to run it this kind of way, and I'm going to adapt what I like to do to what the book is asking me to do, if that makes sense, because there's always a GM section which breaks down how you should run this game.
Yeah.
But once you've ran a few games, you kind of start developing your own style.
Yeah. It is, I think, entirely dependent on the game in question, because like my instinct is to start from, okay, they've made this game, they have ideas on how it goes, and hopefully best practices are included in the book, and sort of ideas and like explicit intent. So I go looking for those with any game that I have. And well, the unfortunate reality is that, as you say, there's a lot of GM sections, and I think a lot of those are unfortunately entirely lacking in any kind of useful information when it comes to running the game.
This is my kind of follow-up thing that, for me, like when I started out, like I watched loads of videos, I listened to podcasts, I played in games, and what I tried to do is I'm going to try and distill like the way to run the game. Like I was like, I'm going to figure out the way to run the game, and then I can apply that to every game I come across, because that's the efficient way. That's like the time, like a manageable way of doing it. Figure out how to do it, then any game I run, I'm sorted. However, I discovered that philosophy does not lend itself to the hobby in some instances. If you stick with one game, yes, you could definitely do that. But if you want to enjoy the breadth of the hobby, you have to be flexible. So now I develop a kind of a tool set approach where I have this thing I need to do. I've got these things I've learned before of how to deal with it. But let's see what else is out there.
Tell you what, listening to that, I'm just imagining like Matthew in like a TV commercial being like, the essence of roleplay.
Yeah. Because I've read a lot of GM sections, and like the great Skylord here said, like some of them really good, and that's I could do a whole podcast on like great GM sections for books. We should, John, at one point.
Yeah, I want that.
But some of them don't almost sell the game. They just kind of give you very kind of like, well, talk to your players.
I mean, yeah, and that is something that is kind of I think maligned a little bit, like that. Oh yeah, it's so reductive. Everything boils down to talk to your players. I find that is kind of because it's so.
It is good advice.
It is true. That's why it's peddled a lot, because well, this is just me talking from my personal perspective and preferences, as always. Everyone is usually, because well, anyway, I absolutely cannot see myself playing a lot of extensive campaigns or like sequential or like short campaigns or just regularly in general with folks who would need constant talking to when it comes to like actual, you know, bigger problems. Now with the folks that we've been playing for years now, we tend to talk just in general, like just chit chat anyway. I guess what I'm referring to here is that there our spheres tend to be like friend groups, and there's already like established rapport. Um, People know each other, and still we talk about different. Well, we've been talking today as we record this. We've been talking about issues that we've run into and things that we sorted out by, you know, reflecting and talking about stuff. And then we continue to talk about them now here after they've happened, and those talks have been had. So I think like talking to your fellow gamers is very much like the top piece of advice. That's where you start, and then you get down to the nitty gritty of whatever else it is. But as far as like GM sections go, I think there's, depending on the game, I find a lot of them miss the point that I go there to look for, which is like the best practices and the idea behind why something is in the game and how you would best be able to leverage that and what sort of outcomes we're trying to look for. And I think with a lot of games, the maybe it's a issue of like design by committee, because then you have a lot of people involved, but a lot of games tend to be very shy about saying like, this is the idea that we had, which I find to be silly, because obviously you had an idea like this. That's why the game exists now, and that's why you made certain choices of materials and mechanics, and not coming out and spelling it out. Like the thought process, I find, would be the thing that I go there to look for. Like, why did you make this game the way that it is? Let me know. And then that will help me to use these pieces that I've now arrayed here before myself. And a lot of the games don't do that, and that's fine. That's fine. Like I can find my way there eventually, but that's what I would ideally find in most games. And this is, I think, also probably a kind of sort of sliding topic between like, is it big publishing? Maybe. Okay, they will be more reticent about saying, like, giving you direct advice, because they want to my mind anyway, they want to pretend that you could do anything, and
they want to appeal to as big a market as possible.
Yeah, they don't want to put their foot down and say, this is the big honking thing that we want this game to do, because they want to give you the option of like they want to not explicitly say what it is, so that a lot of people feel more comfortable doing something that may not be exactly that, which they could do anyway. But you know, that's
it's like when they say this game's high fantasy, but what does that mean for your game? What is it? What do you mean by that here?
Is high fantasy to you? Does it involve anything to do with space?
Yeah.
Is that a limit? Like, how far out the atmosphere can we go? Like, is the moon something we can go to? Is that sci-fi already? Like, where's?
Does it mean the players are movers and shakers in this world at the beginning, or not? Like, if that's the case, because high fantasy tends to be of a higher like threat level just off the bat.
I mean, to reflect on some of the stuff that Johannes was saying there, one of the things that I like, and I know that Johannes likes about Burning Wheel, is that the author's very clear in his sort of authorial asides, for want of a bad term. Like, I've done this way because it worked for my group and my group liked it. So the sort of the intent of the author is very much there and sort of front and centre. And it's also one of the things that attracted me to Easy D6 that I'm using now, because again, it has that little box out from the author where he's sort of talking about these thought processes behind various facets of the game. It's also one of the reasons why I enjoy having such a variety of like OSR stuff, because most of the, not all, but a lot of the D&D sort of retro clones and stuff like that, they normally come about because someone looks at basic D&D and they're like, I 90% like it, but like, it'd be cooler if they could focus on this particular bit that I like a bit more.
Yeah.
And so they make their own version and they focus on that. Whether it's like the summoning rules in like Lamentations of the Flame Princess or dungeon exploration rules or whatever. And I always find that in those games, because the person who made them is so interested in like that particular bit, they always sort of tend to point out like why that particular bit of the game that they've added or that they've accentuated is cool, because that's what spurred them to create their own version of the game. Whereas, like I say, it's, you can dig through and go, oh, I think the author's doing this because of this. But I vastly prefer it when an author's like, yeah, I've done this rule because of X, Y, and Z. And then if I'm like, I don't like that rule, I can still go, yeah, but at least I understand why they've done it, rather than just sort of having to guess why they've done it.
Yeah, and I find, just in general, I find it to be enlightening and entertaining. Like, I want to learn about why someone made something in a game like it is. Because that will, well, I suppose it's another one of those things like down the line, yeah, I guess I would like to publish something on my own. Like, as a very distant idea. But I just find it fun to learn about why someone designed a game a specific way. And aside from it being fun, it'll just help me do it because I know what they wanted to go for, so I can do my best to use the tools that I've been given. And of course,
out if it works for you in your game or not.
The asterisk with everything that I'm talking about is I am 1000% of the opinion that if you buy a game book, it's just a book. Like, at the end of the day, like, so what's the book going to do to you if you just skip a portion of it and not use it? Like, that's fine.
Well, that's it for this episode. We hope you've enjoyed this conversation that we've been having about various aspects of the TTRPG hobby. And then maybe you'll join us next time for further conversations, hints, tips, and stuff like that. If you'd like to get involved in the conversation, you can get in touch with us a number of different ways. You can drop us a message on Anchor. You can leave us a message on SpeakPipe. There'll be links in the description down below. Or you can send us an email to rddrpgpodcast@gmail.com. So until we see you again, take care, stay safe, and whatever you're playing, have fun.